The small American town seemed wrapped in a blanket of stillness that November evening. Dim streetlights flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. Marcus Jameson, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in his 40s, walked with a steady stride, his work boots crunching against the gravel of the quiet residential road. The day had been long and grueling, spent managing a construction crew on a project that was both behind schedule and underfunded. His body ached, his hands were calloused, and he carried 2 heavy grocery bags filled with dinner ingredients. The thought of seeing his wife and 2 children was the only thing keeping him energized. As he approached an intersection, Marcus noticed a police patrol car parked just ahead, partially hidden by the shadows of a large oak tree. 2 white officers were inside. The older one sat with a bored expression, his hands resting on the steering wheel, while the younger officer was animatedly gesturing and talking. Their car was strategically positioned facing the road, as though lying in wait for an unsuspecting passerby. Marcus felt their eyes on him immediately. He kept his head down and walked purposefully, his pace steady. He had learned over the years that avoiding eye contact with the police was often the safest option. Still, he could feel their gazes following him, heavy with scrutiny. He was no stranger to this kind of attention, but it didn't make it any less uncomfortable. "Hey," the younger officer muttered to his partner, leaning forward. "Look at him. What's he doing walking around here this late?" The older officer glanced up lazily. "What do you care? He's probably just heading home." "Yeah, but, doesn't he just look like he's asking for it?" the younger one said with a sly grin. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a small box. "I got an idea. Let's make his night a little more interesting." The older officer snorted, shaking his head. "You're a damn fool, you know that? But fine, go ahead. Let's see if he jumps." Marcus heard a loud whistle, then a sharp explosion just a few feet to his left. Startled, he stopped in his tracks, the sound of the firecracker reverberating in his ears. He turned his head toward the police car, and his heart sank. The officers were leaning out of their windows, laughing uproariously. Before he could fully process what was happening, another firecracker went off, this time just inches away from his feet. Marcus jumped back instinctively, the bags in his hands swaying precariously. His pulse quickened, and a rush of anger coursed through him, but he forced himself to remain calm. "What the hell are you doing?" Marcus asked, his voice measured but firm. He took a cautious step back, staring at the officers with a mix of disbelief and fury. "Relax, man," the younger officer called out, still laughing. "We're just joking around. No harm done." The older officer chimed in, smirking. "Yeah, lighten up. You looked like you needed a little excitement in your life." Marcus tightened his grip on the grocery bags. He could feel his palms sweating, his body tense with suppressed rage. He knew better than to escalate the situation. In moments like these, anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. Without another word, he turned and continued walking, his jaw clenched tightly. Behind him, the sound of their laughter echoed down the street, a cruel reminder of their power and his vulnerability. By the time Marcus reached his house, the warm light spilling from the windows did little to ease the weight pressing down on his chest. His modest home, a single-story bungalow with a neatly maintained front yard, was usually a haven for him. But tonight, even the sight of the porch light, left on by his wife, Julia, as a signal of welcome, couldn't lift his spirits. As he opened the door, the smell of baked chicken and roasted vegetables greeted him, mingled with the sound of soft jazz playing in the background. Julia was seated at the dining table, her laptop open, surrounded by stacks of legal documents and case files. A prominent judge in the local court, Julia was known for her sharp intellect and unflinching sense of justice. Her work often kept her busy late into the evening, but she always made time for Marcus and their children. "Hey, honey," she said, looking up with a warm smile. Her expression shifted the moment she saw his face. "Marcus, what's wrong?" He placed the grocery bags on the counter and leaned against it, his shoulders slumped. For a moment, he said nothing, staring at the floor. Julia walked over, concern etched into her features. "Talk to me," she urged, placing a hand on his arm. "What happened?" Marcus hesitated, then let out a heavy sigh. "It was the cops," he said finally, his voice low. "2 of them parked at the corner. They thought it'd be funny to throw firecrackers at me. They were laughing like it was the best joke in the world." Julia's eyes widened, and her hand tightened on his arm. "They did what?" "They were playing games, Julia, like I'm some kind of entertainment for them, and they didn't care that I was just trying to walk home. His voice cracked slightly, but he quickly composed himself. They treated me like I was nothing. Julia's expression hardened, her jaw set. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "We're not letting this go." Marcus shook his head. "And do what? File a complaint? They'll just brush it off, like they always do. Nothing's going to change." Julia's eyes burned with determination. "Not this time," she said firmly. "They don't know who you are, and they sure as hell don't know who I am." The next morning, Julia was already up early, seated at the kitchen table with her laptop and phone. She had spent the night thinking, planning, and now she was ready to act. As a judge, she knew the legal system inside and out. She also knew that cases like this often went ignored unless there was undeniable evidence and public pressure. Her first call was to a colleague who specialized in civil rights cases. Together, they discussed potential legal avenues, charges of misconduct, abuse of power, and even racial discrimination. Next, Julia contacted a local activist group known for holding law enforcement accountable. They immediately offered their support and began organizing a community meeting to raise awareness about the incident. But Julia knew that the key to any case was evidence. She began canvassing the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen or heard anything the previous night. To her surprise, one neighbor had captured part of the encounter on their home security camera. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show the officers throwing firecrackers and laughing as Marcus jumped back. "This is it," Julia said, showing the video to Marcus that evening. "This is all the proof we need." Marcus watched the video in silence. When it ended, he shook his head. "I don't know, Julia. Taking this on, it's risky. You're talking about going up against the police. And they're wrong," Julia said, her voice steady. "We can't let them keep doing this. Not to you, not to anyone." The case quickly gained traction. Julia's connections in the legal world, combined with the support of the activist group, brought significant media attention to the incident. By the time the court date arrived, the story had spread beyond their town, drawing national interest. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, and concerned citizens filled every seat, eager to witness the proceedings. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table beside Julia, feeling a mix of nerves and pride. He hadn't wanted to be in this position, but he trusted his wife's judgment. The two officers sat at the defendant's table, their expressions a mix of defiance and discomfort. They had dismissed the initial complaint as trivial, but the public outcry had forced their department to take it seriously. Julia presented the video evidence first. The footage played on a large screen showing the officers' actions in undeniable detail. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the firecrackers exploded near Marcus, followed by the officers' laughter. "These are not the actions of men sworn to serve and protect," Julia said, her voice resonating through the room. "These are the actions of bullies who abuse their power. They thought they could get away with it. They thought no one would care, but they were wrong." The verdict came swiftly. The officers were found guilty of misconduct and suspended without pay. The court also ordered the police department to implement mandatory training on racial bias and community relations. For Marcus and Julia, the victory was bittersweet. The damage caused by the incident couldn't be undone, but their actions had sparked a broader conversation about systemic injustice in their town.